A lot of you are familiar with the story of Joseph and the coat of many colors. In Genesis 37, Joseph was Jacob's favorite child, and he had no shame about making that obvious. He even gave Joseph this special coat as a sign of favor, and Joseph abused the privilege that came with that until the rest of the family hated him, and things got so bad that his brothers sold him into slavery to be rid of him and make some extra money. But there's an extra layer to this story if you're familiar with ancient Hebrew. The gift that Jacob gave Joseph was a ketonet pasim. Most English Bibles will translate that either as a long-sleeved robe or a multicolored robe or coat, depending on how they interpret the text. That phrase only occurs one other time in the entire Bible, in 2 Samuel 13. It says that King David's daughter Tamar wore a ketonet pasim because that is how unmarried princesses dressed at the time. So linguistically, we have reason to believe that Joseph is wearing a fancy multicolored dress. By itself, that's not really enough to make any claims about Joseph, but rabbis have preserved the tradition that Joseph liked to wear makeup, among other things. It's not possible to assign modern categories to ancient people, much less ancient literary characters, but if Joseph were being written about today, we would probably say that he was gender diverse, or maybe non-binary or transgender. So we can't say that there are no LGBTQIA plus people in the Bible, or that Scripture is universally homophobic, because there are many queer people of faith today who see themselves reflected in his story. And remember that in a homophobic culture, God loved and was faithful to the gay kid. I think the fact that Joseph rejected cultural norms of masculinity and heterosexuality can explain some of the hatred and violence in the story between him and his brothers. They didn't just plot to kill him before deciding to sell him into slavery. They displayed remarkable violence to the coat itself. They ripped it into pieces and they dipped it in blood and gave it back to their father. And it wasn't just to try to trick him into thinking that Joseph had been killed by an animal. They attacked the thing that symbolized his gender diversity and their father's acceptance of it. And this kind of thing is still happening today in our country. The number of hate crimes against LGBT people have increased dramatically in recent years, and we're witnessing a wave of legislation that is targeting transgender Americans. The violence displayed towards trans people, both physical and legislative, in America today is no different than the hatred that caused Joseph's brothers to rip up his coat and dip it in blood. But that's not the end of the story. If you're familiar with Joseph, you know that things dramatically improve for him, and he ends up being one of the greatest heroes of the entire Bible. And one thing that the Bible makes clear is that God always takes the side of the oppressed and victims of injustice. In Genesis, God didn't side with the people committing hate crimes, but God chose Joseph to be God's instrument in a pivotal time in history.